Now, you are not going to be surprised by this admission, but I'm a huge fan of the process. It is the only thing that keeps me sane to produce the quality of films that I do at the ridiculous pace in which I do it. There are few times I make an exception. However, they would look something like this. Come and drive our 600 horsepower car on a racetrack. Only catch, we don't have a whole hell of a lot of time to give you to do your usual filming. Well, in that case, I said yes, and in February you saw a first on-track review of this, the F90 M5. Now it's time to go back to our process and do our usual tech review and full first drive review, but this time on regular roads. And I know I joke around with you with cars like this, Etch-a-Sketches and iPads and notebooks, but forget about the jokes. We have a ridiculous amount to cover, so belt in because we're about to dive into the tech review of the F90 M5. Now, I would be hard-pressed to believe that anything has changed underneath the hood here in the 2 months since you and I have driven this thing, but still, let's go over some of the basics and then drill down at some of the details as to why this engine does what it does. The basics are a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8 with 2 turbochargers packaged into V. Now, as an aside here, this is indeed a trend you and I are seeing a lot as of late, not just with BMW. So why do they do it? If you were to talk to an OEM, they would give you a litany of reasons, but at its root level, there are basically two. Number one, getting air to the turbochargers more efficiently and thus to the engine. And then the one they don't talk about as much is packaging. Think about it, the turbochargers used to be hidden like down there and there, now they're here. So in this case, what does it translate to in terms of output? Well, this is where we get into some comical numbers. 600 horsepower that comes in at 5,700 RPM, and another comical number, it stays flat up to 6,000 RPM. Then there's the torque, and this is an unusual instance where you and I have had some advanced knowledge here because we've driven this thing before the tech review. And so what we learned was, as much as you think 600 horsepower is going to be explosive, in this case it's not. It's very linear. So why is that? Is it because it has 553 pounds of torque? Not exactly. Is it because that torque comes in at 1,800 RPM? Also not exactly. The reason why is that torque stays flat all the way up to 5,700 RPM. I can't think of a V8 turbocharged car you and I have driven that's had that kind of flat torque curve. Anyway, some other details. Now, we've driven a lot of Porsches and a lot of Mercedes that have this kind of setup of an engine as of late, and most of those have a dual clutch transmission. BMW has chosen to stay with a torque converter, but there are 8 forward gears in this case. And then last but not least, another comical number, and this one, it falls under the heading of me being an old Supra HKS guy. You see, back in the day, to get 14, 15, even 16 PSI out of a turbocharged engine, that was like otherworldly, man. It meant you, not the OEM, you tuning that thing to within an inch of its life, and the car leaving you on the side of the road like multiple times a month. Forget about multiple times a year. Well, here's a case where from the factory is almost 25 PSI. If I'm going to be pedantic, 24.46 PSI from the factory. So this is the reason, or one of the reasons, why this 4.4 liter does not put out a measly 456 horsepower like in that M550. This one is 600. So here's the reality of any car lucky enough to be blessed with an M badge. And I'm not talking about one of these M Sports, I'm talking full-fat M badge. The change is they're mainly under the hood or under the car, which I am completely fine with. However, in the case of the F90 M5, there are some changes on the interior we need to discuss. The general theme, design of the interior, is completely taken from the serial production G35 series, which itself is pilfered from the G12 7 series. That's all fine and good. But then trim, that's really the big changes. Like this carbon fiber, it's really kind of a fake carbon fiber. I know you guys love carbon fiber on the inside of cars, but call me old-fashioned. I would love to see that like orangey Alpina wood here. Granted, that's limited to the Alpina. How about like satin finish wood? This is, even though it's 600 horsepower and this is like a new techno German car, it's still an old world car. So how about some wood here? At least give me the option for it. And that kind of picks up in terms of the coloring. So the color and trim on this is specific. That blue is specific to the M5, and this like orangey camel brown tan interior, that's also specific to the M5, and you don't get it until you see this thing in person. Like all the stuff I'm posting on Instagram, none of that has any filters in it. This is really an incredible color. Then the roof, we're going to talk about this some more, but that panel is a carbon fiber reinforced polymer, so no sunroof. But there's an Alcantara headliner, visors, as well as the pillars, and this picks up this extended leather really well. And basically this is the extended merino leather, and it's fitted as standard on all F90 M5s. Of course, I'm going to geek out a bit here. This one is fitted with the Bowers & Wilkins. Kind of kicks. And then the steering wheel, that changes as well, but the big changes are these two red buttons here. And basically what this does is they're programmable, but not for the radio and not for the navigation. That programs all of like the dynamic mode settings. So I'll tell you the next segment what I do with this button here, but it's laughably good. Then the shift knob. It's not a manual. Yeah, I'd love to see a manual, but it kind of feels like that when you put it in reverse. And it's more chunky, so it's more fulfilling when you drive it. And then they have this button on the top, which changes the speed of the transmission shifts. This thing, it's a spaceship. And then speaking of spaceships, the seats. So yes, more contoured, more supportive, more adjustable, but there is something, and you know me, I love me some party tricks. So when you're walking up to the car at night, and the car is dark, and you got the key in your pocket, the little logos that say M5 in each headrest light up as you approach the car. It's like, it's almost as cool as 600 horsepower. So you and I have no time for dimensions in this tech review. If you want dimensions of a G35 series, got a completely separate tech review for that. Click on it, all the dimensions you want. Here, we're going to focus on M GmbH driving dynamics upgrades to the G35 series. And the serial production cars got good bones to start with. So like, for example, in the front, it's double wishbones. In the rear, it's a 5-link unit. From there, the guys at the Fizz, they rip out all of the bushings, like every last one, as well as the dampers, completely put them in the bin, and then they bless it with unique dampers and bushings for the F90 M5. So just as a hint vice here, much stiffer even in the comfort setup. And this is something we're going to spend some time with on the full first drive review. Granted, we tried it on a track already, but now we've got to use it in our home turf of Moto Canyon. Should be interesting. Then from there is the brakes. 15.5-inch diameter rotor in the front, 14.96 in the rear. Couple of interesting things going on. Number one, the calipers, 6-piston in the front, 1-piston in the rear, and that is whether you have metallic rotors or carbon ceramic rotors. And you remember in Greece we drove that Cayenne, it had those coated brakes? Well, this doesn't do the coated brakes, but supposedly the regular brake package, the metallic brake package, is an M carbon, so it's basically a hybrid of a carbon. So it's not carbon ceramic, it is a metallic rotor, but there's a blend, and the idea is to lower the unsprung weight around each corner. Now, there's another interesting thing going on here. This is a 600 horsepower car, people, and it has regenerative braking with 600 horsepower. I'm trying to wrap my brain around that one, but I do find it, again, comical. That's kind of the theme with this thing. It is comical. Then let's put that aside. The wheels. Now, it's fitted with 19s as standard. This one has the optional 20-inch wheels. And then back to comical, the rubber on this thing. This is a family sedan. It's got two 75/40s in the front, two 85/40s in the back. Now this one with the 20s, it's two 75/35s and two 85/35s. I mean, it's like, it blows your mind. Then there's the electronic controls, and it kind of needs it, but then they go like 8 steps further, and there is a cornering brake control, a dynamic brake control. There's like 100 different controls and computers in this thing to make this do what it shouldn't do. Basically, it defies physics. And then there's the elephant in the room, and that is the all-wheel drive system. Now, I know I committed heresy in the first on-track review with this thing. I didn't switch off the front wheels. But sue me, man, I had maybe 10 minutes seat time in this thing before I switched on those cameras, so I wanted to bring the car back in one piece so we could have more time with it. Anyway, not gonna make that mistake again in the coming full first drive review. We are indeed going to switch off the front wheels. As a matter of fact, I've been driving this thing around town in 2-wheel drive mode. I love the concept of programming one of the buttons to be able to completely shut off the power to the front wheel. It's kind of like bringing me back to the old days of an E39 M5. So there are a couple more things you and I need to cover before we close out this episode, and one is circling back to driving dynamics. Now I know I gave you a raft of changes that the folks at M GmbH have made to the underside of this car, bushings, dampers, that kind of stuff, but that was really focusing on taking parts off and replacing it with other specific different parts. Well, when there's a donor G35 series, there are parts that are the same, but what they do change is some of the construction in select parts. Like for example, some of them are made out of lighter weight aluminum, and that picks up a theme that we're gonna see in the coming full first drive review. And you know what, I'm not really gonna call this the full first drive review, I'm gonna call it a living with the F90 M5 episode, because you and I are gonna do some things with it that you wouldn't expect with a 600 horsepower car. And we'll see some of those like lightweighting themes like this. Some of them you see and some you don't, so I'll point those out to you in that coming episode. Anyway, what does that all translate to in terms of weight? 4,370 pounds, not exactly my beloved Elise, but then what does that translate to in terms of performance figures? Because this is not exactly a small car and definitely not a light car, as we just found out. Well, 0 to 60, it's once again comical. It's actually almost GT3 territory at 3.2 seconds to 60. And then top speed in the like bargain basement version car is 155 miles an hour, so it's electronically limited. But then if one were to opt for a driver's package, 189 miles an hour. And it's just, forget about comical. I mean, seriously, it is mind-boggling. You could put a child back there and take them to preschool in a car that goes 190 miles an hour. It just puts a smile on your face. Anyway, until our Living With episode, I'm gonna leave you guys with a question. The question is this. I know that I love the color of this car and I love the color of the interior, but there are times where I don't want you to see me coming. Like, I want the 600 horsepower, but I want the car to look like a 530e. It's almost like, hey, I'm gonna hit you in the back of the head with a 2x4, but at least you won't see it coming. Get it? So I wanna know, what changes would you make cosmetically to this car? It could be something as simple as the orange Alpina wood, or completely stripping the car of this kind of stuff and make it a sleeper, or do you want some like ridiculous competition wing and more carbon fiber and that kind of stuff? Let me know what you would change, and you know what? How much would you pay for those changes, and what region of the world do you hail from? And for good measure, let me know if you actually drive an M car. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word. And until that episode, I do want to leave you with something. It is lovely getting a second bite at this apple because, Santa Maria Madre de Dios, it's wait until you see what we do with this thing in the full first drive review. Until then, fish paper.